Yeah. All right, everyone. Welcome to another round of Another Round. Tonight we have the very special guest, my friend Phil Jimenez.
Yay! Hi, everyone.
Also joining us is the standard crew of Barflies. We got Scott Kolins.
Hey, everybody.
And Stephen B. Jones. And me again. Yeah. Awesome. Well, welcome, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's actually, I have to say, really nice to see you. As I'm sure you know, a lot of us haven't seen each other for a long time for various reasons.
Right.
And so catching up the past few months with folks has been really nice.
It has been really good. One of the reasons that we are really inspired to do the show is because it gives us a chance to see each other and actually have some kind of contact with people outside the studio. And I know that you're still teaching. Do you do that live? Or are you doing that online?
I stopped teaching this year, mostly for time, but also, mostly for time. And I actually miss it quite a bit. It was one of my favorite things in the world to do. I was teaching when the pandemic hit, and we went remote immediately. And I tend to teach life drawing for cartoonists.
Right.
So that was a very interesting switch because I tend to work with my students. Like I go to each of them and work with them and draw with them. And so to not have that, let alone we hadn't figured out how to do models yet. So it was a lot of just drawing from photographs and reference, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't able to draw with them, which I found flummoxing. But I've since figured out how to do it. And I've done a lot of remote drawing classes, and it's still not quite the same, but it's doable.
Excellent. I find that one of the things I miss most about living in Los Angeles is going to figure drawing classes and figure drawing workshops.
Jeff, I thought it was me. But okay, the figure drawing too. That could be upsetting.
Yeah. I would draw you when you weren't looking.
That's true.
Right. Yeah. That's not creepy at all.
No.
It's just usually when I was asleep or coming out of the shower, and that's okay.
So I'm just drawing.
I'm practicing. This is my craft. This is my art.
Jeff, this is not your cue to post embarrassing photos of Scott and I posing for superhero shots from the 90s when Jeff would be like, hey, I need a shot of Green Lantern blasting something. And so Scott and I are like,
oh. That's awesome. It's funny because I have like 30. I don't have them here. I have them at my desk in the other room. I have like 30 reference books that I purchased over the years. It's all it's all pose books, right? And I love these things, and you will see in my work over and over, I go back to about the same 5 figures. There's a lot of repeats. But the funnier thing was on Historia, there are a lot of close-ups of hands, and so I use my hands. So Hippolyta and the Amazons have very pudgy, meaty hands.
Strong hands.
And they're very sturdy-handed Amazons. And it is very funny also because you can tell when I'm using my face, just because I make certain expressions and my lips take a certain. It's just very funny when you end up using yourself as reference or friends as reference. For me, I mean, of course, I adapted, but you can always tell.
It comes through.
Did you give the Amazons a shave?
Yeah.
It's It's definitely the best part about sharing a studio. And when the 3 of us did, like, I think, I acted in college. I've been in a couple films and commercials and different stuff, but I think my favorite acting role is being Supreme for Jeff when he was doing Supreme versus Bloodwolf.
Yeah.
Because I just got to be evil Superman, and I really took it way too seriously. If you go into my Instagram, I think there's a couple pictures.
Oh my God. I really wish that if I had known we were going to talk about this, I would have downloaded some of the old Polaroids, because it was back in the 90s. We all shared a studio, and I had a Polaroid camera, and I would just make them pose, put a towel on their backs as a cape, and then just take these horrible
There's a great one of Scott just screaming at the top of his lungs, like pointing into my chest, and then me just looking at him with complete disdain, like, I will heat vision you to death.
Yeah.
I thought I had a couple of them on the bookshelf, but I don't see them right now. Maybe that's a good thing.
A friend of mine, a woman from the gym, actually was my model for Hippolyta. And often the only time I would see her was at the gym. And so I'd be like, hey, can I snag some photos? So we would just finish kickboxing or some other cardio class. And then I would have her, and she was a good sport about it. I'd be like, so pretend you're like climbing on a horse, or grab these reins. And then I would take pictures all around her. I'm like, okay, I need you to pretend you're killing someone with a sword. So she's in her, workout gear, and we've just finished, and we're in like the little cafe section, and I'm just taking pictures of her. And there's still some the artwork that I just released today. You can see the pose. She posed for the Hippolyta in the background, and it was at the gym. It was just very funny. No. It's another one of Hera. She's all in gold, kind of leaning back.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's just funny that's how we gather reference and where. Yeah. And then the models who are good sports about it.
Yes.
They're like, okay, because she was like, okay, like whatever. She wasn't embarrassed about it, which I loved.
Well, you need what kind of crazy hand?
Yeah, what do you want?
Right?
I remember way back in the 90s when I was, or even the late 80s when I was trying to break in, I was doing a new Warriors sample, and it required Night Thrasher swinging his
skateboard of death.
Yeah, and at that time I didn't have a Polaroid, so I believe I just made Steve hold the skateboard up in the pose while I drew it, and like at that angle you could see his arm was shaking and he was as fast as I can.
Phil, before we even had Polaroids and samples, I remember drawing my very first batch of samples to try to break in. I was doing Green Lantern, Guy Gardner, and Hal Jordan, and I had Jeff pose in his leather jacket as Hal Jordan, and poor Jeff. I just sat there like it was a life drawing class. Like I thought I had unlimited time with Jeff. Jeff's like, aren't you going to just hit some of the main points? Like 25 minutes later, I'm still destroying each thing.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Posing's hard work.
Question: How did you all end up in the same studio?
So Steve and I, hang on a second. Steve and I went to high school together, and so we met. We met in drawing class, and
Jeff,
then
I was sort of considered to be the best artist in class, and then Jeff transferred to my school, and Jeff, I'm a year younger than Jeff, but at that time I looked a year older because Jeff was rather diminutive at that point, if you can imagine. And I remember strolling up saying like, oh, what are these shapes you're drawing here? That's pretty interesting, And then, oh, you like superheroes, eh? Me too. I want to be a comic artist. And then Jeff actually drew something, and it was so much better than where I was at that point. He actually scared me into being an inker for about 3 years. I just went like, well, maybe I could ink your stuff, I guess, because I clearly cannot draw as well as you.
There was a dude in my high school art class who worked on that Aha video from like 1986.
Yeah.
He was like one of the people that did the drawings, which was a hard reputation. Like he was the special guy until he graduated, and then I moved into that slot. But for a couple of years, the Aha video guy was like the dude.
Right. That's funny. Yeah. So then after that, I joined the Army, and Steve went to college. And then when we got back together to start making comics, we had a studio together. And then at some point, Scott moved from his state to California, and then joined us. And then we were all studio mates for years until we all, went to the separate ways to do animation and whatnot.
Yeah, it was total happenstance that I ran across these guys. Just a total luck of fate twist. I had no idea when I moved out to California I was going to find these guys there, but I did. It was awesome. And I joined the studio within like a month or whatever of me moving out there. It was awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Jeff, we have been talking about building relationships in our business. And so one thing I've never done is actually work in a studio with anyone. I've worked by myself, unless I've been working, like if I worked at Warner Brothers on a project there. But in comics specifically, I've worked by myself for 30 years. October was my 30th anniversary in comics.
Wow.
And I realized that, I realized I've been by myself for about 25 of those years when I wasn't, because I worked on a couple of animation gigs and a couple of TV development things. And so I would be in a space with other people, but that was rare. And so Cully Hamner was talking about his studio with, I think it was Adam Hughes and Brian Stelfreeze and George Perez. And I was thinking about other people who had studios, and I was just never part of one. And so I'm always really curious how folks connected, if they were old friends, if it was just happenstance, and how relationships were formed in those studios.
That's interesting. I definitely, I know that one of the things we wanted to talk about tonight was the relationship between writing and drawing, but I definitely think the building relationship in comics, it is so weird because we all are so isolated in what we do is really try and make connections through our art and through our stories. Right. So I've always thought that dichotomy was fascinating, is like on one level, we are incredibly isolated and singular in the thing that we're trying to do. But the thing that we're trying to do is build all these connections and reach fans and tell our stories and share all of these stories. So I always thought that was a really interesting break in like the two ways to be in a relationship. Yeah. But a studio is a great way to do it.
But it's interesting.
I'd be curious what your take on this is, just as a group, because one of the things I do tend to think about folks who do what we do is many of us are introverts and a little myopic. I don't know if that's true for the entire business, but it is funny in terms of building social networks because so many of us are here doing this.
Right.
Where did he go?
He's
bored already.
I think Scott froze, and then he's trying to reassemble himself.
He'll jump back. He'll jump back into it in a second.
I was teasing, but anyway, I think about this a lot, about the temperaments of the folks in our business and what it takes to do what we do. Right. Yay!
Yeah, that was fun. That was a lot of fun right there.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because the temperament it's interesting because we are, weird, little iconoclast introverts in a way. But like one of the things about you and I, like we're all so similar, right? Like everyone I know, we all have such a similar backstory and similar, not aesthetics, but just a similar sensitivity to things.
I remember one time I was in Mike Carlin's office early on, and there were a bunch of us freelancers all hanging out there. He turned to all of us. He goes, "Okay, who doesn't have a problem with their family?" And we all just laughed. He goes, "Yep, that's what I thought. That's why we're all here."
Yeah. Yep. Pretty much.
The interview we were doing yesterday, we were talking about drivers. Like I started, so it was with some college friends, and I don't remember this, but a lot of my college friends remember me being particularly driven. And the minute I got to school, from the minute I started working, like I didn't go out very much. I was always at the table in the dorm drawing. Like they just they seem to have a very vivid memory of this. And it was so funny because I was driven because I was like, I can't go home. Like I can't fail, right?
Exactly.
Like, so I can't screw this up, because if I do, that means I'm shunted back. And I was one other thing I've been very interested in lately, and I think it's just midlife crisis, but is that what drives us to do what we do. And I heard Jim Lee a couple of years ago, I forget, it was New York Comic-Con, maybe 3 years ago. And he was talking about having a similar driver as a young person, from parents who didn't want him to do what he did. And so he worked out of the space of defiance, maybe even anger, to be like, I can do this and make a living. And then of course he became Jim Lee.
Right.
And so I was thinking a lot about, so just going back to Carlin's joke about family, he doesn't have family. I was thinking about our drivers, right? And like what pushed us, particularly in the beginning. And I think it's true of most folks who create, right? 80% of them create from that place as opposed to just a place of, just joy is maybe not the right word, but like,
Right.
frivolity, right? Like we all have something to prove.
Right, exactly. Any sort of like casual approach to it is kind of lost. Yeah, I was definitely the same
pain
way.
For the artist is always the thing.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Pain for the artist is always the thing.
It's a thing.
If there's no struggle, then there's very little art.
Well, and
It's
I mean,
true.
I think very, very often for a lot of us, I mean, it's whether it's an escape from a painful reality, like whether that could be getting picked on at school because you feel different. It could be what's going on in your family life at home. Like whatever it is, like, I think not just drawing, but finding your way into comics. I think, comics represent a place where like things kind of happen the way they're supposed to happen. And I think that's probably something that attracted us. Like, I know when Jeff and I had our first sleepover, we had the same comics, like, or he had some of the holes that, like, I didn't have Ronin #6, or I had discovered Chris Claremont and John Byrne on Marvel Team Up and X-Men, but I didn't have any of the Iron Fists, so it was like staying up and reading those all night. But I feel like those comics represented a world that I wanted to be a part of, and gave me some sort of sense of like a right and wrong that I was like, I grew up in a more conservative family than I realized, and I think even like, I was lucky enough actually at Emerald City to, like my, like Misty Knight and Danny Rand, like that had a big effect on me. Like, seeing that happen in a comic is part of what made me think that was okay to happen in real life. And, for over 20 years, I was Danny Rand and was with Misty Knight, and we have two little, Misty Knight and even though in the end, our relationship, we haven't stayed together, but it's still like wouldn't have happened if not for, I think Chris Claremont is a huge part of that. And the world of, that I think that, and especially, the X-Men, I saw you put an Instagram post up recently, Phil, about like loving on that Paul Smith, JR, like, Chris Claremont era of comics. And I feel like that stuff like drew me in,
Nice screen grab, by the way. Wow.
Well played.
As if on cue.
Check. Like, bravo to you.
There you go. Which, yeah, I love those too. I'm glad that I'm not surprised that those are an influence on you, because one of the things I love about your so we're gonna gush a bit because we've been looking at your art getting ready for this, and it's ridiculous. Your stuff has always been
get a bib, Phil.
Damn you, Phil.
We're gonna gush a bit.
Yeah, your stuff has always been so damn good, and then I'm not surprised that Paul Smith, John Romita, like your sense of storytelling is always so clear. That do you think that's from those early guys that you really liked? That sense of I need to show everything and let everyone let you know exactly what's happening?
So without doubt, as everyone knows, I think my sense of narrative is absolutely stolen from George Perez. I absorbed it when I was 11 or 12. We all have those comics that were like, for lack of a better Oprah term, like the aha moment.
Right.
I posted today something about was New Teen Titans number 12, and it blew my mind. I was like, this is what I'm really curious, forgive the kind of detour, but I'm very, very curious about the timing, the content, and then the art itself, right? Like my age, this material, the look of that material, the content itself, it was magic. And at that moment, I feel like I was like, this is how I want to tell comics.
Right.
That's when I started drawing my own comics. I mean, it was. So I would say my sense of narrative, the way I think about character, body language, sequence, time passage is ultimately. I'm a student of Perez, right? And who was, I think, a student of Buckler, who was ultimately a student of oh my God,
Kirby. Jack King Kirby.
No. Crazy Psychedelic Nick Fury.
Steranko.
Oh, Steranko.
Yeah,
Steranko.
Okay. Yeah. So like I'm definitely of a school, like of a thread. But it's ultimately Perezian. But the thing that I did want, the thing that you did
Perezian.
and one of the reasons going back,
I like that. Yeah.
Yes. Is especially in the black and white versions of those of the 3 X-Men books. John Romita Jr., whose run on X-Men was quintessential to me. A lot of people don't love that run of his. It's not their favorite work of his, but which is weird to me. But there's a period from about issue 180 to 200, and it's where the storytelling in that work, the narrative storytelling, sequential panel storytelling, is some of the most clear I have ever seen in a comic. It is stunning what he was able to accomplish in 5 panels in a team book in black and white, often with gangrene inks. I study that stuff constantly, and I'm not sure as a child or an early artist, I would have assumed that Romita Jr. stuff would have impacted me. But as an adult, I go back to it, and I remain really awed by what he accomplished narratively in those books. So even if folks don't necessarily love the surface work, again, the sequential stuff, his sense of pace and time and the emotive quality of his figures, I think really impacted me way more than I thought it did when I was younger, when all I wanted to be was sort of George Perez Jr. And I was saying in another interview recently, and I don't know how you all feel about this, like there's a very interesting thread, I think, in our business of authorship, right? Like finding a singular voice and being known for something.
Right.
And that was not my goal. Like I didn't get into comics thinking I'm going to become the new Bill Sienkiewicz or the new, Chaykin or whatever. Like I was very interested in perpetuating and carrying on a tradition. I loved Perez's stuff, and I saw it as like a goal to carry, like to take what I believed he did that was unique and carry it further. I was less interested in carving a name for myself than I was in taking a school, a way of working, and keeping it going. Because I saw in the comics as I was getting into the business that was fading away for other kinds of work.
Right. Well, Phil, I think all 3 of us love George Perez so much, and I'd be interested in everyone's first experience with him. I know mine, I could tell you. But how significant was it to you also as a young man to like the fact that you guys both had names that ended with EZ? How significant was that in terms of discovering, like, how meaningful was that to you?
I want to say that it was, it became the most powerful when we were both nominated for Eisners the same year, and he called me son.
Oh,
that's beautiful.
That's a great moment.
That's really cool.
And I think that connection, it was the first time I made a connection, not only emotionally with him, but with our last names, right?
Right.
So, and then that, yes. And leaping ahead to one thing that this is sort of a sadder memory, but when I was hired to do The Return of Donna Troy, I was going to be me writing Jose Luis Garcia Lopez drawing and George Perez inking. And we're like, this is going to be mind blowing. And we're so excited. And this was in the early days of Dan DiDio's DC Comics. And that book from issue 1 was taken and messed with. And we were all like, what do? You got the 3 of us on this book. Let us do our thing. And from the minute we started, it was just nonstop Misery. That thing, yes.
Yeah.
That lovely work.
Yeah.
I love
And
Donna
it's such
Troy.
a shame because we had I come up with a plot, we were ready to go, and this is before, and I'd be curious Dan's memories on this, but this is before I realized that Dan likes to throw bombs. Like, you have this perfectly laid out thing, and his belief is that's when you throw a bomb in it to get like the next greatest thing. So we had this really sort of beautiful, to me, it was a really beautiful 4-issue series. Dawn returns, love letter from each of us who had worked on that character. My love for Donna came from George, etc. And poor Garcia Lopez, multiple editors. We had to incorporate 2 teams. It had to lead into Infinite Crisis, like all the stuff that was never planned for. All of that is to say, on that work, it was very exciting to George that 3 people whose names ended in EZ were working together. And it felt generational to him, and I myself love that. So I think
3
I regret on some level.
titans of the industry.
Oh, wow! Thanks, guys. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, to your point, I think it was in those moments where I realized the import of our last names.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one of the things we wanted to talk about was just relationships in comics and building relationships between the artists and fans. But like you were talking about, so that it was the relationship between creators, but also you as the writer, George was going to finish, and Jose as like the penciler, and like I think that those like how did you write? I know you've written for yourself and you've written for other people, and you worked on stuff that other people have written. Like, you've done all of it. Like, did you approach that differently, knowing who you were working for or with?
I did, and that particular project, when I write for other people, I write full plot. I write Marvel style, and then I dialogue to what they do.
Okay.
And with Jose, unfortunately, my memory of that project, that he still speaks with me, I'm grateful for, but my memory, so I was writing full plot, but we suddenly were doing 2 groups of characters, Titans and the Outsiders, leading to an epic miniseries. It became different than what the book was. So it became a lot of stuff to absorb. Because it was like, okay, on this page, I now have 11 characters. So they, right?
Woo!
And I think, to be fair, I think I overwrote the plot. I don't think, because I also realized I was writing a plot for me, and I'm not sure Jose gave a shit, quite frankly. And he's like, who am I drawing? I need, but I also just think there were so many hands in that, and I was trying to make things clear for him so he knew what all the characters were doing, and I just think I overwhelmed him. So and part of that was trying to compensate for the editorial notes that I was getting. Again, generally not the best experience, and not one I would repeat. But what I learned, of course, was to write for the artist who's drawing the book,
right?
Which I'm not sure we all do. I could be wrong about that, but when we are for artists who write for other people, I don't know how quick we are to adapt. I did it one other time where I wrote for an artist, a fill-in artist, and I was expecting pages that were like mine, and I think I unfairly demanded too much of the artist. I did not adapt the work, and it's something I still regret.
Well,
I mean,
that's a huge thing to get
both
over.
sides.
That's a huge thing to learn and deal with when you're doing that stuff. I've written a couple stories or short stories and stuff for other people as well. And that's one of those situations where honestly, there was just a whole bunch of like initial shock of like, wait, that didn't come out anything like I thought it was going to.
Right.
And you have to be able to work within that framework of going, right, but you're not drawing this. You let someone else draw this, so they have to see it their way, and hopefully they can still get, the main pieces across or whatever. I guess it would work better if we had longer experiences to write for someone else and get the feeling of what they like to draw or how best they work.
Right.
But that's a huge thing for a new writer to get used to.
I think so. And I think the writer, I've worked with writers myself who either get it or they don't, right? And that's I've worked with writers who are perfect for me, and then others who are not. And I think this is true of everyone in all of our systems. But the ones who feed into what I'm good at and write in a way that I like, yes, I get it 100%. And then others who, because I can do a lot of panels on a page, write me like, okay, page 6, panels 1 through 13. I'm like, well, that's not really how this works.
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly. Don't box me into what you think. Like that doesn't actually help.
There's 50 people in panel 1.
Right.
Well, it's funny too when
exactly.
when an artist.
My favorite was there was a panel 12 or something. It was panel 11, biggest on page, which always makes me laugh.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, okay.
That's funny. We all have those stories of getting something. One of my personal favorites is Space Armada or 2 clashing armies, and you're like, oh, son of a bitch.
Well, the funny thing for me is working in mainstream superhero comics. I'm like, okay, I'll do that, but I'm going to need reference, right? Like, if I'm going to draw your Armada, I'm going to I'm going to want. I'm going to want your editors are going to work because I'm going to your assistants because I'm going to draw this stuff that's been established. And what was this something? Oh my gosh, I drew.
Stick it to him, Phil.
I remember doing one of those Justice League montages, and everyone had ever been in the Justice League, and arguing with an editor because I was including a character that they didn't like, and it was sort of like, well, that doesn't matter if you didn't like them; they were actually still Justice League, right? So if because my thought was if I'm drawing everyone and I'm missing someone, that's I'm thinking a bit like a fan. That's the first thing they're looking for is like, oh, who did you miss?
Right.
So, but I remember fighting with this editor. They're like, don't put him in there. I'm like, why? I don't like him. But that, or forget about them. I'm like, no, that's not how my brain works.
Right.
If I'm going to draw all of them, I'm going to draw all of them.
Well, speaking of drawing all of them, this is one of my favorite images. Look at this craziness.
Oh my Lord.
Is that everyone, Phil? Did you get them all?
That was everyone. I think I did that in like 1998 or something.
Uh-huh.
I think it was like for Green Lantern or Quarterly or Green Lantern, like when we were doing those gallery books.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was everyone at the time. I think there were like 180.
That's the artistic
or something of them.
Artistic equivalent
But
of
you know
a hair
what's
shirt.
funny about that one is the perspective on them is actually really bad. They're all kind of flat on their back because my thought was they should be coming at us. But I just crapped out, and so the perspective is actually kind of bad on that drawing.
I don't know. It works.
It's fine. It's good. Like it could probably use some recoloring, but it just makes that was all of them at the time.
Wow, it's just always impressive. Yeah, your attention to detail is bananas. So, what do you feel like when you get into a page? Apart from the lineage of art that you come from, which is give the audience everything, right? Let them soak in the world. What about that compels you? Like, do you get lost in the drawing? Like, is that something that happens for you, or are you just trying to make it always be epic?
So probably three answers to that question. One, the practical, yes, it's actually fun to draw. Like I tend to do that because I enjoy it. There's a certain probably OCD quality to it about filling space. Yeah. But also I like drawing different things and often those group shots, there are many characters I will never draw again except for in those group shots. So it's an opportunity to draw to meet a challenge. Mm-hmm. But going back to our X-Men conversation earlier, I realized that one of the things that drew me to the X-Men, and I've told this story a million times, and maybe you've heard it a million times, but that what drew me, while many of my friends were attracted to the X-Men because, their outsider status, I was attracted to them because they were essentially a group of rich, like folks who dressed up and lived in a mansion in upstate New York and went to outer space and wore thigh-high boots. They had what I believed were, and I interpreted as really extraordinary lives, right? I'm like, if that's what being an outsider is, I want to be that. right? Like I want to go wear a big black cape and go to the Hellfire Club and,
Absolutely.
or like, I want to go to outer space and meet the Shi'ar. Like the extravagance of their lives was very attractive to me. And I realized that in superhero comics specifically, but fantasy is appealing to me as escape, right? As possibility. My work is absolutely grounded in my childhood compulsion to escape from where I was. Mm-hmm. So everything I was drawing, from Star Wars to the New Teen Titans, was about being in worlds that were more exciting or magnificent or bigger or epic than my own. And so I think that's a huge component of why I'm attracted to that kind of material. And finally, and this doesn't necessarily make sense for me financially, but I think comics are really expensive. And so my feeling is the stuff that I love, I can return to over and over and over and find something new. So part of it is, for your money, I'm going to give you this experience that you can return to a dozen times and find something that you didn't see before. And so it's rooted in those things: escape, again, a little bit of OCD, and then the sense of what I put value, perceived value for the work itself.
But Phil, I think those comics that you're referring to, I think all of us had that experience of, I can't tell you how many times I've reread, the Claremont run of X-Men, the Jim Shooter, George Perez, like Avengers 160 was my first George Perez comic and one of my first comics ever, where the Grim Reaper is try to decide between is the Vision or Wonder Man the true Simon Williams. There's so much sophisticated storytelling George is doing in that, and there's so much goddamn detail. Or you think about like Michael Golden's drawings in Avengers Annual 10, Rogue's first appearance, like just some of the tech that Iron Man, like when Iron Man's like talking on the phone, leaning over, he's got his helmet off, there's like something in the background. So I feel like the comics that we all fell in love with, that you could return to them over and over and over. There was so much that was put in, there's so much. I always think about that. What's the Frank Miller quote about Jack Kirby? The love he gave a page, and I feel like that era of those late 70s, early 80s comics, and especially, like you're all of our hero, I think what Marv and George did with the New Teen Titans, it was almost like Where's Waldo in terms of like, wait, what's Donna and Corey drinking at the swimming pool when Garfield and Vic and everyone first show up? Like that was in there if you looked.
It's a
the thing that
world
he was the talking about Perez again. It's something I sort of absorbed beyond detail, beyond surface detail. Like, oh look, like every knob and every button's drawn. He was hyper focused, and like at his heyday, probably late Titans crisis through early Wonder Woman, he was particularly interested in the details of characters, their height, their body language, their body types. And the consistency of that, I think, is really extraordinary. And one of the things I teach a lot in drawing is like something I learned from Perez. Changeling was this tall, Starfire was this tall. It changed their dynamic, right? When you looked at a team that he built, especially as he got more refined, body types changed, physicalities changed. That changed the relationships between characters. And so it was those details, at the end of the day, to me, those are the most important details. They're character bits, which is the stuff that I latched onto so much. Like Donna Troy does not look like Starfire. Like they're like, except for they're kind of both chesty ladies. But that said, Raven is not. Like they're very distinct people with very specific body types, and because like Raven's costume is not complicated, right? Like in black and white, it's like 5 lines. Same with Donna's. I mean, that jumpsuit is this like 5 stars, and like they're not detailed, but the detail that he brings to character is something that I found infinitely attractive, and it's something I think about a lot. And it's something I'm drawn to in other people's art, I have to say.
Mm-hmm.
No,
well, yeah. Well, you go ahead, Steve.
Neither you or George have like what I would maybe describe as a photorealistic style, but there's definitely right. You don't have stock faces. You don't have stock, but like I, as a really cartoony cartoonist, am so deeply attracted to silhouettes. Please come to my website.
Yes, I am too, actually.
But well, that's what I love is that both you guys, if I can lump you in with your hero, like have a far more photorealistic approach, but it's the same thing. You don't do facial silhouettes, body shapes. Like within the realm that you guys are playing, you're still playing with those silhouettes, which to me is like, that's my favorite thing.
Go ahead.
Because some of our favorite artists did kind of just have a stock guy and a stock gal, and that's why, and you just put those 5 lines on them and colored them differently to tell them apart, right. It is a little bit, I mean, even in that first, that was when I didn't work on the initial Justice League animated cartoon, but I worked on Justice League Unlimited. And I think something that was so much more fun about Unlimited was, because a little bit of the trouble with the first Justice League was kind of 8 characters with, 6 male body silhouettes that were pretty similar. And then Hawk Girl or Hawk Woman and Wonder Woman silhouettes are a little bit different. But once you got everybody in there, then suddenly you started getting all shapes and sizes, and it's something that, Murakami and their team did so great on the first Teen Titans, animated show, was just to give those wildly different silhouettes of the initial 5 characters, Cyborg, Starfire, Raven, Beast Boy, and Robin. But that's a fun thing about what you have done, and George too, which is like to still be drawing realistically, but to still be playing with silhouette, and that people have different noses that are distinct, on the same handsome face, or different jaw lines or different cheekbones, Mm-hmm.
I went back just in the last year or so and looked at Titan stuff again, because my kids had liked the cartoon so much. And I went back to that Terra stuff. Holy mackerel. Terra is by no means any sort of cute little, goddess girl like she is on the animated show. She's got a lot of negative kind of physical attributes to her that do not make her any sort of dream girl. Mm-hmm. But that was part of that magic at that time. I was one of my first posts when I joined Facebook. I went through a bunch of the major influences for me, and he was definitely still one of them. Perez was the guy that reminded me when I was creating my own supergroups, or I was drawing my characters, or learning how to draw the major characters of the Marvel, DC, whatnot that we'd be drawing later, is to come up with those definite different types, because Perez was loud and clear with all that stuff about each one of those had a different height, had a different build to it, had a different jawline, hairstyle, everything about them made each one of them unique, so that, in silhouette or another, you could tell them apart. But more than just being an on-model kind of a thing and adding to the reality of believing them as real people and characters interacting, it also spoke to me as like, but it's also that inclusive mentality of those supergroups and everything that we're enjoying so much. We love Storm being in the X-Men. Well, we hadn't had major Black female characters in the groups before, being a very strong, even maybe dominant character in the group. And the same thing for the different types that were in the Titans book. Yes, some of them were knockouts like Starfire or Wonder Girl or something like that, Donna. But then there were other ones like Raven, and they all played an integral part of being, of giving that sense of reality to it. Because it informed, it could be anybody. You didn't have to be just Luke Skywalker to be a Jedi Knight. You could be all these different types of people and still be in this book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We just got a comment, Scott, that from I want to bring up just because it relates to one of Jeff's heroes, is Noel N. says Alan Davis is another artist who pays attention to these character traits. When a character's just standing in the background, their character comes through. And I think about, like, when you think about Excalibur's silhouettes, right? Like the Captain Britain, Nightcrawler, Megan, Kitty Pryde, and Phoenix, like 5 completely recognizable silhouettes if you knock them out. Like, and it's interesting. I think every artist maybe we're all, it's like, you think about, say, when Silvestri first started on the and for any of us, you know, it's like, first you just sort of try, can I draw a superhero guy? Can I draw a superhero girl? Like, can I just, you know, figure out that template? But then as you get better, hopefully it's amazing to see when you start pushing and pulling and playing with all of that different stuff. And the more you, right, like with Phil teaching life drawing, the more you actually study life, the more you're able to really push and pull like silly putty to change those silhouettes and make them, you know, unique and interesting and different.
Yeah. One of the things that I think, talking about the relationship between writing and art, is so much of the writing that you do as an artist is, who is this character? How do they move? What do they look like? What shapes do they have? How do they interact with the other characters? What relationships do they have to their backgrounds and the other people in the cast? And that's all done with body language and shape and all that stuff. And I think Phil is stunning at that. His character designs are always unique. And Phil, can I just jump ahead for a second? I wanted to talk to you about this, your character designs for some of Historia stuff. Jones and I have both we've all designed characters for comics, and Jones and I have both done a lot of character designs for animation. And part of that is, you know, figuring out shapes and posture and all of that. And some of these designs you're doing now are outrageous. How are you going about this? Like, are you getting a character description? Or are you discussing it?
No,
with,
everything you see is mine. I wrote all that.
Yeah.
So this particular project, Historia. So Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's the writer,
right?
She describes it, and I think it's a perfect example of, it was a conversation. Who and what? So backstory for anyone who doesn't know. Wonder Woman Historia is a graphic novel I've been working on for several years. It's coming out end of the month. Written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, who's probably best known for Captain Marvel and Bitch Planet. And there was a lot of discussion about what are Amazons, who are they, what are the goddesses, what do they represent, etc. This book is a history of Wonder Woman's people, but it is non-continuity. It's sort of set aside. So when it came to creating this sect of Amazons, 2 or 3 things happened practically. We decided that instead of just a kind of monolithic group, that there were tribes. Each one was represented by a certain goddess, right? Because
cool.
Multiple goddesses created the Amazons. So rather than just a bunch of women kind of in Greek armor, I wanted to make sure that each represented by color and decoration represented the goddess that created them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, you know, please, it's right up my alley. It's and I say that because I've done so much thinking about Wonder Woman and the Amazons for so long.
Right.
Both in her book, I've done lectures on it. I've written academic works on it. There's a book called Keywords that just came out, and now colleges are using it. And I say this with I guess it's some degree of pride. I was asked to write the Wonder Woman section. So colleges now teaching comics academically have this guide, and a bunch of people contributed to it. So there was a shared language among institutions about everything from what a panel border and a gutter is to who Black Panther and Wonder Woman are. So I've just done so much research and so much thinking that this was real joy for me. Again? It's called Keywords. Keywords. And the quick name drop, the editor, one of the editors' name is Ramsey Fawaz, Fawaz, who also wrote, and I recommend this for all of you because I think you will eat it up, a book called The New Mutants, which is an academic overview of mostly Claremont's New Mutants, but other comics as well. And it's a love letter, an academic love letter and understanding of these comic works, rooted in this sort of core idea that the New Mutants, the sort of Claremont's and Cavish New Mutants, was revolutionary at the time, even more than the X-Men, for diversity, not simply racial, but gender and class diversity. Like and represented through young voices, right? So it's all this sort of interesting work. Anyway, Ramsey follows Newton's. Ramsey was also the editor on Keywords. It's really cool work. Blah 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 blah. I think about Wonder Woman a lot. Clearly,
Right.
You have your doctorate.
Yes.
I've got the
Well, I mean,
doctorate.
you are the expert when it comes to. I actually wanted on a quick side note. We have to do it now because I mean, you and I could talk for hours about any of this stuff. But like, I would love to hear just sort of your cohesive, overarching, uniform field theory of Greek and Roman mythology, from Ovid to Bullfinch to like, how did you synthesize
Percy Jackson,
the different all the different stories?
So I'll tell you very quickly, an author who's had a huge impact on me is an author named Karen Armstrong, who is a religious scholar, believe it or not, and wrote a book called The Short History of Myth. But she was most famous for a book called A History of God.
Okay.
And it is not a religious book. It's actually like an academic work on literally the what gods are and have been to human beings from caveman times to our times. But she said something, and this is my whittled down. There's no orthodox version of a myth. Myths have to change and grow. The stories have to change to speak to the people of the time and to resonate with them, or they have no meaning. They have no power. So my take on mythology is it's not stagnant. And it's not one thing. So there are these Greek and Roman myths, but there are always interpretations and reinterpretations, and you have to reinterpret myth, including superheroes, for next generations in order to make them relevant to them, right? Like, or they lose power. Right. So that's my overarching thing about Greek and Roman mythology. So the trick with Historia is that we treat mythology, it's a basis, but it's not, we are not beholden to it.
Excellent.
I've had some interesting conversations who are like asking about certain mythological characters. I'm like, you need to prepare yourself. Like, Hera dresses like she walked out of Vogue, right? She's not in togas. She's like, you can see my fashion influences on her on purpose because she's speaking to a modern audience. And so Olympus is definitely like, you know, it's a little Perezian and kind of topsy-turvy, and there's the Greek and Roman stuff, but I designed it to look much more like Versailles. Versailles was a big influence on me because Olympus is, in our book, is such an expression of Zeus's ego. And so it reminded me of a French palace. So a lot of the reference I pulled, it evokes Greco-Roman stuff because those palaces did.
Right.
But it's really French, like
Interesting.
Yeah, because look at that! Wow, you went through it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That came out beautifully in color, by the way. Arif Priyanto colored that, and I'm shocked. He colored every little rooftop on that.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. This is the danger. Also, it's a quick aside of drawing on an iPad because I was able to zoom in, so I'm just drawing like. And all those
Phil,
houses.
that seems really dangerous for you. Like, I know some artists that draw digitally in comics that they've set up. I'm only allowed to zoom in to X amount. You know what I mean? Like,
Procreate doesn't have that, and it actually killed me. And I mean that legitimately. Like, I had to. I was constantly zooming in, although I think the end result's quite beautiful. But one of the many things that slowed me down was the ability to zoom up so big without pixelation. So I would.
How long have you been working on this?
Wait, yeah. So you
3 years.
And you've been
how many?
3 years.
I worked on the book for 3 years. To be fair, I was also working on like a little TV project. It was not the only thing I was doing. It was the only comic work I was doing, and it did take a long time. And I think the pandemic also threw me. My productivity really lessened the first few months of that pandemic. So this is an interesting. So that's the Perezian part of it. You know, kind of weird topsy-turvy interlocking. But a lot of the decor that I reference, I have like books on, you know, French and European castles. So to your original question, my reduction of myth, like the overarching thing is, there's no orthodox version of myth, and
Gotcha.
they have to evolve and grow and change. We use them as a basis for telling a story to an audience in 2021.
Gotcha.
Mm.
Brilliant.
And
So is
Phil,
this like a
you're-
60-page one shot? What is this?
It's a 64-page volume 1 of 3 volumes.
Oh, wow.
Gene Haas drawing the second, Nicola Scott's drawing the third.
Wow.
And it's the first ever, it is the first time a female author has ever written the history of the Amazons in comics. We've had female authors write Diana's history and reimagine Wonder Woman's childhood, but never the history of her people.
Very cool.
And Phil, did you say so? You're drawing your pages in Procreate right now?
Yeah, most of them. There was I was penciling and inking. The first pages you can actually see, and then I would scan that in and clean it up on Procreate or do the extra details. And then about by I don't know, page 25, those pencils got looser and looser, or the inks got looser and looser because just the labor of cleanup and redrawing was just taking so long.
For sure.
So by the end of the book, it was loose pencil breakdowns, and I was actually inking them directly in Procreate.
So this book represents your transition to working more digitally? Like, is this okay?
Yeah.
So
basically, and that actually came out. It's funny. These are early shots from like. Wow, it's amazing to see that. Like, so this was, a couple of years ago. But this is me figuring out how to work digitally. Me learning texture. So the thing that digital gave me, I would be curious about all of you, is I started playing with texture and I started doing things I am not skilled enough to do with ink. Creating a monsoon behind Poseidon.
Yeah, those clouds were cool.
Yeah. Or creating like this horse texture, which is funny. All of this horse gets covered up because when I designed this, I was just like, it's not right, and so I created like this whole bear skull for the horse. So everything that you're seeing there is not in the final book.
I love you for that. I love you.
Yes. So you're a lot of I can see the Procreate brushes that you're using for a lot of these like it's actually my daughter I saw people drawing in Procreate online, and then my 12-year-old just started going crazy on my iPad, and I'm like, what are you doing and how are you doing this? And then now I've started to be drawing in Procreate just from basically mooching off my 12-year-old.
It's so funny seeing these in production because they've I forgot what they looked like back then. It's very, very funny. Yeah. So again, please jump in. I'm just babbling. I was not a Photoshop person, partially because I found the screen very overwhelming. So I don't know about you. I'm terrible with choice.
The interface you're saying, like because
the interface
some people have
is not good.
Yep. Well, it seems nearly infinite, right? Like Photoshop it's so deep. You can do so much with it that when you're first looking at all those choices, it makes you just want to run and bury your head in the sand. Or at least that was my first experience.
Right.
As I was saying, I'm not good with choice. I don't need 10 TVs to choose from. I need 3. And so one of the dangers I found working digitally was infinite choice. And even on Procreate, which is much more limited than Photoshop, there's still hundreds and hundreds of effects possibilities and color possibilities. And one of the things that really gummed me up was that several of them looked fantastic. Like, I could do this, and it all came back down to what we were talking about earlier, is like, what's best for story, what's best for narrative. Is this moving the story along? Does this just, this is a great effect, does it stop us cold? It was a lot of those questions that we would normally ask ourselves just with, pen and ink.
Right.
But there were so many options. And I just came to realize halfway through, I'm like, I am not good with infinite choice.
Well, but that's the thing, is that when we're doing the page just to begin with, in the layout stage or any of those things, just to get a regular page going, we're already dealing with a billion decisions about where they are, how they are, the order that they are, how this page deals with the next page and the next page, how the whole issue works together. All those millions of decisions that we already have to make just to make one page, if not even a comic book. But then you add a million textures and everything else on top of it. Yeah, then it gets to be too much. I do some stuff in Photoshop or whatnot. But yeah, I immediately like limited myself to, I don't know, I've got like 6 or 8 brushes I use, and that's it. I won't give myself any others because it's an endless road.
Yeah.
I would love to talk to you. So, because I do, and it's funny because I'm not a great inker. So I inked this whole thing. I did all the washes for it, whatever. And I have a very mechanical ink line. But the one consistent thing that I did use in Procreate was there was a certain pen, a certain brush I used for all my inking.
Yeah.
And then try to hide the failures with the other sort of textures around it.
Sure.
So it's fun. It's just funny, like the default. Yeah.
It's really fascinating work, man. Like, I think that that looking at, one of the things I like seeing, like, you posted a bunch of stuff on your Instagram, like this one and this one, like, you just being able to look at just the level of world building that you went into, like this work, and all your work really, but this work in particular doesn't just let you fall into it. It sucks you into the world and holds you. It just holds you captive while you're looking at these things. It is.
It grabs you by the throat.
It's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It grabs you and it pins you.
I will not be ignored.
I love hearing that again, because part of that was I want consumers to have an experience, right? I think one of the things that we superhero comic book people are competing with are movies like Dune, are movies like, for better or worse, I'm going to say the hero action adventure genre stuff. We're competing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and so, for better or worse, again, it's not financially wise on my part. It takes, like, I hemorrhage money on that project, and I say that not boohoo, just because my pace was so slow. I was doing commissions and stuff on the side. But part of that is a sense of, like, if you're going to pay $8 for this, and my Hulu subscription is $6, right? Like, I better give you something that at least you'll go back to, that will last you as long as a Hulu movie, right? Or something like that. So part of it came from that. The other part of it was masturbatory. It was, when very few people get the chance to come back to something they love, right? So I did my Wonder Woman run 20 years ago. I thought after the New 52, I was done with DC. Rebirth came along. It was a very mixed bag. Like, I left really miserable. And I just had come to think, I'm done with DC. DC's done with me, and that's okay. It's been a really good career. And then this opportunity came up, and I thought, who gets that? Very few people have an opportunity to return to something they love so much and and reinvent it, right?
Yep.
Like, the expectation is that you're going to come back and do exactly what you did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so for me, it was, I've thought about this and rethought about it. It was a chance to reinvent and to work with someone, I have to say, who taught me a shit ton. Like, I learned so much about how to think about story from working with Kelly Sue. And I hadn't felt like that in 10 years. I didn't feel like I'd learned from a writer that I had worked with for so long.
Yeah.
And so when we were talking about story or ways to think about character, or she would interpret a character, I'm like, oh my God, that's so genius. And it had been a really long time since I'd felt like that.
That's inspirational. That's great.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
It was lovely. Yeah. And so a lot of that sort of world building. And the interesting thing about Historia, maybe minor spoiler, is a lot of it takes place on Olympus. Oh, I have a funny story about this. I don't know if you have the finished shot of that. but there's a texture that ended up in her face, which was a total mistake. And a lot of this book I realized were happy accidents. Like I was playing and then I would just land on something. I'm like, done, right? Like saved.
Is this the finish?
What? Yeah.
Is that the finished piece? Yeah.
Look on the face in the pencils. There's a lot of like real texture in the shadow and around her eyes. What that was, for some reason, I'd drawn something and Xeroxed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the way the Xerox looked, so I cut and pasted it. So I drew this face, and then
I can see the cut.
This face, cut and pasted it, the Xerox over this face, and when I scanned it, it became this amazing texture. The Xerox sort of broke up a little bit.
Yeah,
and I was like, that is cool. And so the actual artwork that was colored is a scan of a Xerox of that face.
That's fantastic.
There was a lot of that happened in this book where it was just like, I don't know what, a lot of the colors were achieved by literally just cutting and pasting the same thing over and over and then changing, modulating. Like I did a lot of color modification throughout. And there was one thing, because there was a crown of Hera's that I drew. I don't think you have it. Because she has a different costume in every scene she's in.
Excellent. What a nightmare for you. Yeah.
No, it was a dream. So again, forgive me for babbling. It just makes me happy. The conceit with Hera was that more is more. That she would never appear in the same thing twice. That she's kind of our Amidala, right? Like so, every time she walks in a room, she's in some new ridiculous outfit. Because she's a queen, right? So this is how she's always. So I think she has 8 costumes in the book. Wow. And the last one, there's this big ornate crown, and the colorist wasn't getting what I was looking for. I was like, well, do you mind sending me the file? And he said, sure. And so what I did was I literally just cut and pasted the crown over and over again. And with each crown, I adjusted the settings. So, of course, now I can't think of what they were, but the hue, the saturation, like I would just keep adjusting. And so about the 8th one, it was perfect. And it was like, save, right? Like, that's it. And so a lot of this book, a lot of the effects were just that, like, experiment, and they were less deliberate. It was just sort of like, I know what I'm looking for. I think I know what I'm looking for. That's it. Or if I just adjust this opacity and then cut and paste one more time, kaboom.
There's a really good question on the bottom right now. That was my big question about this. It seems like you put so much effort and so much crazy amount of work in this Historia book right now. I just want to know, we don't have to go on and talk about and push you about whatever's next. I just want to know you're still going to make more comics and this hasn't like burnt you out or something.
I'm not burned out. Good. People were like, are you okay now that's done? I'm like, I'm fine.
have you lost your mind?
Right. Like,
it's a lot of work, Phil.
It's a ton of work, but you know what? Like, what was I working on? I'm designing dresses for Hera, right? I'm drawing Olympus. Yeah. I'm doing this huge graphic novel, reinventing the Amazons. A ton of work, but there's so many. We live in such a rarefied world. I think and I say this I'm not romantic about our business, which I think can be really crappy, but the actual work that we do is a dream in many ways, right? Yeah. Like so much of this for me, the hardest part was because DC, the minute we said yes, they were like, okay, crank it out. It's like, I'm not going to. And if you want me to, fire me, right? Get someone on. If you want 3 books out a year, get someone who can do that for you. Because this is something I'm going to take my time. And the idea that it's coming out on my 30th anniversary, and I started on Wonder Woman's 50th anniversary, and it's coming out on Wonder Woman's 80th. Like, it was just sort of nice. It was a nice circle.
That's excellent symmetry.
It's beautiful symmetry. And so the point being, I will probably do some more comics. I just got a gig outside of comics, which I'm super excited about, related to, but not comics. I'll totally work with Kelly again. We've been talking about a couple things. But no, I'm not burned out. I don't think I can work like this again, because it's not. I had the good fortune of having some resources. I didn't need the monthly paycheck.
Right.
I could not afford to do this again, but I'm glad that
Right.
I have one thing out there in the world that looks like this.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so are we.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I will be stealing every panel for the rest of my career.
It's pretty. I'm actually pretty excited. Also, just as an extra, one thing that was interesting, and thank you for letting me babble. I feel like I'm talking at you. I apologize.
Oh, are you kidding?
This is what we
It's great
want to
get-
hear.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. One thing that I realized did impact me a lot as a teacher was narrative choices. And somebody described this as, oh God, it was, I can't remember the word, kind of my treatise on storytelling. Like every page is about a certain kind of storytelling, a certain design sense of, like every page has an origin. Oh, so you're doing this now. Oh, you're doing this. I get it. And
Right.
I really realized, and I think about 95% of it's actually pretty spot on. There's one moment I'm really bummed about, and I just ran out of time. But for the most part, I think the storytelling itself is really good and quite emotional, and it does what it should. But I was thinking about students, right? And like wanting to be able to walk in proudly to a classroom as if I knew what I was talking about. And it's funny to being at my age with my experience,
I knew exactly what you.
but still worrying about that, right?
Yeah,
like I'm putting
absolutely.
this stuff out. I better be able to back up my shit in the classroom. So like, should she be standing here or at a diagonal? Like, you know, like it was very funny the amount of thinking that went into that from an instructor standpoint. Like wanting to be able to justify what I was telling other students, what I was telling students and artists that, you know, were coming up, and not being lazy about the work itself.
Yeah.
Like being really thoughtful about the work and putting it out there.
Can you imagine anyone calling Phil lazy about the work?
If you just put some more effort into these panels.
Right.
Try harder, Phil.
I'm not fast.
Well,
but
there's
the
that
work-
whole
the
angle
work
of
will
it,
be
but
good.
it's also a matter of like there's half of the things that Phil would be doing with those pages already beyond the new stuff and the programs he was learning.
Right.
There's a million decisions and whys and wherefores of why he'd put that page together or why he'd pose that person that way that he's probably actually not even thinking about all the time. You've got a million other new choices, especially if you've got this new topic, even on a familiar theme or a book or something like that. There's so many choices that we make that are just like inbred to us where I don't even know half the time why necessarily I'm making that choice. Thankfully, I hadn't had to teach a class on it. But if you stopped and asked me about it, like if you started critiquing the page or we started just discussing the page or whatever, I could easily go, oh, well, yeah, no, I did it for this. And then there's this, well, because this leads to this and leads to this. So that's why I said, oh, right. And I did that too. I didn't even know. Look at it. It's over here. This whole corner is because of this reason. So many of those things come because of all the years now that we've put into this whole thing and learning this really distinct, interesting art form for America. Yeah, it's just there's so many things involved with it that we're going to so many things you can think about in the front of your brain.
Well, Phil,
Well,
don't
I
you
love
think
it.
that's part of that's part of the gift of teaching, right? Too, because with what Scott's saying, it's kind of like when you first study martial arts or something like that. They're just teaching you how to stand and then like maybe to block or something. And so that's us 30 years ago when it's like, okay, Jesus Christ, how to draw comics the Marvel way? Okay, circle, square, cylinder, but then, I mean, maybe it's because you've taught all along, but I think when you teach, it forces you to be able to articulate things that you may be taking for granted, like as you're, and so when a black belt's teaching, you suddenly realize like, oh, I'm making a million micro adjustments to block that punch before it comes in. And when you're just standing there with your white belt, you're just like, okay. And I feel like with drawing, it's that same thing of, you have to think about everything and it's bone crushing, like, how am I going to arrange these 11 people in a panel? And now that's probably something that all of you guys who draw 11 people in panels a lot more often than me do effortlessly, I think, but it's not an easy process.
Scott Snyder and I talked about it was actually really fun. We did several years ago, we did a panel on horror. I moderated a panel on horror comics. And there were a bunch of people on it, Becky Cloonan and a couple, like, I'm trying to think, it's like 5 or 6 artists. What was very interesting was Scott was the most compelling and the most able to articulate some very specific thoughts and ideas about how to write horror and what makes horror frightening. And we talked about it later, and he's like, oh, because I teach, right? So like I have to be able to articulate with some specificity what it is we do. So I have to take this thing that I do almost instinctually and then break it down and verbalize it. And I do think it's a very interesting exercise for artists of all kinds to be thoughtful and express decision making, right? I am weary of it because I'm so conscious of the decision making, I think it slows me down. It's no longer instinctive. I second guess everything. Because I'm like, I've drawn what normally would be instinct, and I'm like, well, it could go this way. I could make this choice because that story will be different. But I do think it's wonderful to hear artists who can really talk about their process and their choice making, who are aware of it. And the only reason I can, or like I think Scott can, or any of you who have, is because when you're forced to, it makes you really think about the work and the way you do it. I have a crazy question.
Sure.
Can I use the restroom?
You know what? We've been talking for like an hour, a little bit more. We're actually kind of done.
Yeah.
Oh, are we? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well, wait. Because well, oh my God. I thought we were going until for another.
We can go as long as you want. If you want to go to use the restroom, we can chit chat for a little bit. If you want to come back and talk some more.
It's number one, so I'll be fast.
Oh yeah.
All right. It's our first podcast bio break.
There you go.
All right. This is where we vamp, fellas. And we hope that Phil has turned his mic
brilliant.
No,
All
that's
right. So
fantastic.
what's everybody got?
Okay, so let's talk about what we're drinking. Scott, you got a 805 there? Delicious.
Another 805.
Jonesy, what new sodas do you have for us?
Well,
roll drum. What is Jonesy got?
All right.
What country is it from?
We all know that Coke is my favorite drink, and I will do it a different night, but at some point I will of course do the greatest version of Coke, which is the Mexican Coke, but because of the real use of sugar as opposed to the high fructose corn syrup. But I think maybe to compete with Mexican Coke, Jarritos, the soda company that's from Mexico, they've got now their own version called MXCN Cola, which we assume maybe stands for Mexican Cola. So let's crack that open and see how it tastes.
Excellent.
And he opened it for real. He didn't have to do the fake open.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't do a Caddyshack this time. I actually just waited. And again, I think always it deserves that Andy Chang should get a shout out for my amazing bottle opener that he gave me. And I apologize that for many years I thought Jay Hong gave it to me, but no, it was Andy Chang.
Excellent.
Jay Hong would never do something that nice.
Coyote's calling you out, Jeff.
Well, okay, so tonight I actually did not get a chance. I've been doing a lot of stuff, but yeah, a lot of stuff away from my desk. But Steamworks Meadery is my sponsor, and they provide fantastic mead. And I will show you a picture. There's a little link to their thing. They do deliver. They are a fantastic company with delicious beverages. And here is a cool picture of their stuff. Hang on, where is it?
Marvin Duran, I agree with you 100%. Mexican Coca-Cola is the best of all the Coca-Colas.
Yes.
New Zealand's version of Coke is also extremely good because again they use sugar instead of high fructose corn syrup.
Right.
Phil, you missed.
Very funny.
I'm drinking Jarritos.
Oh, excellent.
Phil, since you're back, what was the name of that History of Man book?
So
Myth.
There are two books. A short history of myth. I actually it's a book I teach from. So when people ask me what are your favorite books for teaching storytelling, it's one of the books I use because its concepts I think are really applicable, particularly to action adventure genre stuff. And one of the big takeaways is that a myth well told gives us new information, a new way of thinking about the world, a new way of seeing ourselves in the world. it asks us a new question and makes us ponder a question the way we haven't. A myth poorly told is just a story that we take in and forget about, right? And so that was like, that's one of those big takeaways, and a lot of it has to do with like intent. Like, why do we tell stories? What are the questions we're asking of ourselves, of our readers, of the characters within the book? The idea again that there's no orthodox version of a myth, meaning there's no singular version of any myth, and that they have to grow and change, and you have to adapt them. And then the other again is, you know, it gets I don't know if deep, and it talks a lot about purpose and particularly mankind trying to figure out their space in the world, right? And so and how mythology helped that, like, and different. The other thing I find really interesting, and again, I'm relating it to our business, is how I think we think of DC and Marvel characters, is that some cultures treated their gods as like faraway beings who lived far, like they were untouchable, and others, like the Greek gods, were much more human, like they were like really human beings with a little bit of extra power. In some societies, there was no dividing line, like human beings were in and out of the mythological, and that stuff is really interesting to me in the way that we treat superheroes, right? Like there's always that big discussion about like the Marvel characters are the human ones and the DC characters are the gods, and I think it's oversimplified, but each has its pros and cons, I think, as storytelling tools. And again, what we're asking our audience is to connect with and relate to in the questions that we're asking.
Well, I mean,
so
it's a good one. I almost wasn't going to bring this up in relationship to you bringing this up before, Phil, but now you kind of mentioned it when you said cultures and their gods. And I just bring this up with fullest respect for people whose religious faith is a very important part of their lives. But it makes me think about the adaptability of the Christian myths. I think has been a big point in how they've been able to be so sellable across the world to so many different cultures. You know what I mean? Like that, like, you know, with missionaries around the world going into places all around the world that have giant different backstories, like Christianity has just been a very marketable way of looking at the world. And it's amazing how adaptable it's always been, of like, oh, well, you guys are really into this thing. Okay, well, we won't say that you have to get rid of it. We'll just work it in, you know, right. Like, yeah, okay, Jesus is now friends with this aspect of the thing that goes along with your culture, you know, and that how many variations of Christianity exist around the world. And I think it speaks to its appeal, I guess, is that adaptability of the Christian mythos, if that makes sense, I guess.
Along with that same point, I think of it more as it seems like to me every generation or macro generation kind of thing, our gods and our myths seem to get closer and closer to us in some ways. Like the Marvel characters being closer and more human than maybe the DC characters were before them, that sort of thing. But I think it's also generational, because then there's levels where they've gotten ahead of me of what I consider normal. Like, you know, my kids will, they love to see those videos, whatever, of like Darth Vader dancing to whatever music and doing some Disney, you know, thing on a stage. They all think that's funny, great. And they still love Vader as Darth Vader, whatever. I look at those dance things and go, yeah, it's funny, but no, don't do that to me. I don't want to see that. Vader. He's Darth Vader. You know, you're going to ruin the peek behind the curtain kind of thing.
Yeah.
Two funny things on that. One, well, I'll come back to the funny thing. The other thing I do think, just this is clearly, again, middle-aged dude who's been around for a long time, thinking about this a lot.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But
Middle Earth, yeah, dude? I got you. Okay,
Middle Earth, definitely Middle Earther too. But I do think that one of the things, one of my takeaways from that book about short history of myth, again, is, and it's a common theme, but it's mankind's yearning for purpose, right? Like a need to believe that there's something beyond kind of like the day-to-day existence. And that seems to be, I think, one of the reasons you were talking about kind of like traveling mythology with Christianity, or sort of adaptable mythology. And I think part of that and I think about this a lot with genre fiction, is and the notion of the one, right? Like this idea that I could be the one to change mankind. Like that could be my role in the universe, is to bring about change in mankind. And I was just thinking about the potency of that in a world where I think a lot of people, I'm making huge generalities and not a parent, but just working with a lot of students, I think wonder what their purpose is. You know, like do I matter, right? And so I think that becomes a very interesting, heady question for comics. The other thing, though, but going to what you're talking about, Darth Vader, I also find my nostalgia bone is almost dead. Like, right? Like, which is both good and bad. So I look back on stuff like Star Wars, which meant everything to me as a child. And now I clearly still love it, but I don't revere it in the same way, right? Like, if you want to do Darth Vader dancing on TikTok, I'm like, more, right? Like, I feel like I'm more willing to poke fun at the stuff that used to mean so much to me, or that a particular iteration used to mean everything to me. And now, like, I always joke that my favorite version of Wonder Woman is the Earth One Wonder Woman before George's, because I always just imagine her, like, she had a crazy backstory, and her mother screwed with her head so often, and I just imagine her being like this chain smoking chick, right? Like, I love the idea of Wonder Woman going like, I got stories to tell you, right? I was riding my kangaroo, and my mother took my memories away, and blah blah blah. You know, like, you don't know my life. And then I got devolved, and then some other chick replaced me. But I find that our I'm going to say fandom's inability to be sometimes be playful with this stuff. I recognize it, because once upon a time I was not playful with it, but now I think I'm just old enough to be okay with it, to not fear for its sanctity, to know that I will always love it. Like, nothing makes me happier now. I'm stunned, and when I turn on the Super Friends on HBO Max, I'm happy, like genuinely happy. When a Challenge of the Super Friends episode comes on, I'm like, I can't get over how giddy this makes me. Right. At the same time, you know, a good cheetah meme will make me the happy, because this is funny, right? Like, I'm just happy that I'm in a place where I can be playful with the stuff that meant so much to me as a child.
Oh, absolutely.
Except for Raiders of the Lost Ark, yes.
Wow. I just saw, was it Gail Simone just posted a really funny joke about, like, 60 years ago today, Indiana Jones, like, took a golden thing from a temple and all of his people died. Like, it was or something. It was hilarious.
That. Archaeologist causes 400 deaths or whatever. Yeah. Now, see, some of those things are funny and everything, but when I bring up the Vader comment or whatever,
American grave robber causes 400 deaths.
When I make the comment about those TikToks or something like that going on that have Vader dancing, the reason it bothers me is not necessarily the sanctity of Star Wars or something like that crazy going on. I don't hold it up as a pedestal. I think it's more just my background of so much of my day is spent on, you know, if I'm drawing King Shark right now, or if I'm drawing Flash or whatever else, going like, okay, but if somebody made a mistake and the writer or somebody thought, or editor or somebody thought it was funny for like the Flash to trip over a turtle, I would be the first one going, is there a reason for that? Or are we just trying to make them look bad? You know, we spend so much time trying to make these characters cool and interesting and all that other stuff. I mean, I've had it where specifically I got frothing mad at other creators of other guys at DC Comics, because Jeff Johns and I spent so much time trying to build up those rogues. And then once we, like, you know, shaped them up, shined them up, made them cooler, whatever we were doing with them, then I started seeing them appear in some of the other books at the time, and they immediately made them look like dunces. And I'm like, I'm gonna kill you. Why would you? We just spent 6 months working on this guy, making him cool, so you could believe that he could take on, you know, this imperial or this impossibly, you know, powerful superhero, the Flash. And now you just treated him into a, you know, a trip joke or something like that. Come on. So that's my little soapbox.
I have very familiar feelings with certain Wonder Woman villains like when George was writing Cheetah or Circe, they were incredibly powerful, physically powerful beings.
Yep.
And then when other creators would get a hold of them, it was essentially like Catwoman, like they'd knock Cheetah in the face, and she had no power. I'm like, but she used to fight Wonder Woman over here, right? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, Cersei would do something like ridiculous in one book, and then, you know, she would turn a guy into a pig in Justice League. I'm like, but what about over here? And I think what's ultimately makes me feel, I'd be curious if the same with you, Scott, is it doesn't seem like it comes from a place of goodwill, right? Like they're trying to make those characters, it seems like low-hanging fruit. It seems cheap.
Yep.
Right? And so it's
Yep.
like, oh, this is a funny gag. So you're going to undermine all this work for like a one on-panel gag. That always bums me out.
Yes, it could have, like, actually not in good intentions, or I often find that it was almost a certain ignorance of the work that had been involved, like with Flash as Rogues or something like that, that for a while they had been kind of parodies of not great necessarily villains that didn't seem to challenge the hero. They were almost jokes to some extent, at least in some of the books or whatever they appeared. So they had that kind of appeal to some people, and then we'd spend all that work doing it, and then the next people that would do something, have him guest star in the book, they'd go, well, 2 years ago he was a joke, so today we made him a joke. Honestly, it was that's very related to when we brought Gorilla Grodd in. Jeff asked me what are the things that I wanted to do as well besides the stuff he had on his list, and I said I really wanted to do a really kick-ass Gorilla Grodd that was going to scare people and all that. And he goes, okay, great, perfect. I've got just the idea for the story, this and that. Runs to the editor, talks to him, and they're like, oh, last year we did JLA Ape, and I don't know if we want to. We're like, not that. So sometimes it's, breaking that mold as well, where some people just have that preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be about.
Yeah. And well, I mean, I know that we started off kind of, Phil and I talked about what themes we wanted to talk about and what stuff we wanted to cover, because we knew there were a million things. I mean, at one point, Phil, you were talking about simulacra, and I'm like, oh, we're gonna go deep into the idea of symbology, how the brain interprets signals, and how. So I'm like, okay, that's where we're gonna go. I'm happy to do that. But we picked, the relationship kind of between writing and art and what that means, and I definitely think that it's the purpose of what we do to try and make these connections. And like you talked about the kids who are coming up having purpose. And as an artist, as a comic book artist, I feel one of the things that the job itself, learning how to do the job and being a comic book artist, has definitely given me a purpose. And I didn't have that. That was the whole goal of growing up as a kid, seeing comics, being inspired by the stories and the myths, and wanting to participate in that lineage for sure. And I think it's interesting when you work so hard to create part of this mythos, and then it's not taken seriously, or it's not participated in, or you work so hard to do this stuff. My entire Wonder Man series got turned into a dream by the person who came on and did Wonder Man next. Yeah, it was some sort of fever dream that didn't really happen because we got a crucial detail wrong in his history, not because we didn't care, but because we actually just messed up. And then so the next writer to come on and take care of that character used that as a reason to make what we did not actually be part of continuity. Yeah. So I know the feeling. You're like, oh, tried so hard. It's cool.
I remember on Wonder Woman. So I've been telling this story more recently. So Wonder Woman was a really interesting venture in that when I was hired, I pitched a kind of a standalone maxi series. Greg Rucka was supposed to take over the book. He wasn't prepared. So Carlin put me on the book and reminded me constantly that I was a fill-in artist, that I was not going to stay, and that I should be prepared to wrap up my story at any moment. Like when Recco's ready, I'm out. So my entire first year of Wonder Woman, actually 2 years of Wonder Woman, but the first year, there was all these, it was a very stop, start. The pace of it was very strange. Partially also because we had to do crossovers. So we had to incorporate Our Worlds at War and Joker's Last Laugh, but also because every story I had to wrap up in case Greg was ready to hop on. Greg wouldn't be ready to hop on for 2 years, right? So every story I have has this little ending. And of course I was young and it was my dream to do the book. So I'm like, well, this is my only chance. So I was adapting as best as I could, but the pace of that book is just bizarre because it's so stop, start. But we had to destroy Paradise Island in Our Worlds at War. Fine. I said, can I rebuild it? And they gave me one issue to rebuild it. Okay, great. And so I recreated like the floating Paradise Island, and two things happened. This was pre like a lot of computer coloring. And so my color goals for it were never truly imagined. Poor Trish Mulvihill, she had other people doing the separations. I'd wanted the buildings to look like they were made of like the inside of a pearl, right? And everything just ended up getting really purple. So fans called it Rainbow Bright Island, which was never the intention. But the other thing that was really interesting was George Perez called me and he said, Phil, this is George Perez. And he's like, I have to tell you, this Paradise Island's beautiful. And he went on to compliment me and he's like, this is exactly the arc I would have imagined for the Amazons when I started Wonder Woman 15 years ago. Holy shit. Like George loves it. That's great. That's all that matters. And I was very, very into that version of Paradise Island, and I still am. But of course, Didio came on, Greg comes on. The first thing they do, because it was floating, was destroy it. And the whole sort of advanced society, they get rid of it, and then they turn them back into sort of Bronze Age warriors, which was kind of the counterpoint to that. Like they evolved into something else. I'm really happy that people look back on it and they're like, "Oh, that was actually pretty cool." I'm like, I know it was really cool. But two, that was one of those things where I really learned like nothing that we do with characters that is permanent. Like I can create the coolest thing, but if the editor-in-chief or the next writer is like, nope, like that sucks, it's gone. And you're like,
also
yeah,
we can sell stuff if we destroy that thing. Like
right.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting way of thinking of destruction, but I guess the point being, it was my first taste. My career at DC before that had been generally very pleasant. I'd only had one bad sort of editorial experience, and I got to do Tempest and JLA Titans and Invisibles and a lot of stuff that was really fun and it was thrilling to work on, and it worked out most like. I mean, the work was more rudimentary than what I'm doing now, but it holds up, right? Like, it didn't feel interfered with. And it wasn't until Wonder Woman that I had that weird interference, especially from like the editor-in-chief, we just clashed constantly. And then that realization that it's like, oh yeah, this is not my stuff. I'm just here, for as long as they're going to let me be here. And then when it's time to move on, I'm out. And it was probably a good life lesson in its way. A little disconnecting, but it was, because I think before then I had a real sense of ownership, like this is me, right? Like, and now I'm like, oh no, I'm just here until they decide I'm not here anymore.
Right. You're telling this version of the myth for a while.
Yeah, and then somebody's going to tell their version.
Yeah,
and it will be relevant to them, and and that's just how it all works.
But then pieces of it can still resonate and live on. I mean, I hear that with Flash stuff and stuff too. But just to give you a little side note, for that Paradise Island you were talking about, I got to write and draw and color just a little one-shot Wonder Woman story. And I started on Paradise Island, and that's kind of a little bit of the backdrop of the story, but mostly it's Wonder Woman fighting a giant kaiju and stuff like that. But that Paradise Island, I wanted to do that Paradise Island. I asked to draw your floating one and put it in the story. I wasn't allowed because of continuity, whatever else going on with it. They didn't pick it again, but I'm just like, oh, that would have been so much fun.
Yeah.
One thing although going back to, so it is very funny, emblazoned in head, this is no joke. So your Flash and your Flash run, is kind of, to me, that is the Flash. It's really kind of interesting how that run and your work on that book are my go-tos for the Flash and for those rogues, right? Maybe not the new 52 versions, but but it's funny to me how that to me feels like seminal work. Like that is, in 20 years, that is I feel like a body of work that I would go back to say this is the Flash.
Well, thank you for that. But that's what I'm saying is that, we just do the best that you can at that time and you see what sticks around. I mean, they keep calling you back for Wonder Woman stuff from time and time again. You'll do another poster or a cover or different things come along, or this Historia comes along. And it's because of the hard work you put in the beginning with Wonder Woman stuff. And that the other thing that you mentioned about the start, stop, all your stories. I thought you were doing that on purpose at the time, because when we were on Flash, we were also trying to very specifically do it where it was like as many one-issue stories as we could for like the first year or so, so that we weren't doing those 6-issue arcs or whatever else is going on.
Phil was doing Paul Atreides and Jessica walking through the desert.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking of arcs, so I did Gods of Gotham, and then I was allowed to stay on through Our Worlds at War, and then I thought I would have to go, but no, they kept me on for 3 more issues. And then I had to do Joker's Last Lap, and then I got to reintroduce Paradise Island, and then I thought I was done, and then 9/11 happened, and they're like, oh, can you stay on for 1 more arc? Yes. Can you make it 6 issues so it will fit into a trade? And I'd written a 5-issue story, and they made me extend it to 6, and it's terrible. Like that issue is filler. There was no reason for that issue, and they never until the omnibus. They never collected that story anyway. And then I thought that was going to be it, and they're like, "Oh, can you stay on again? Can you do 4 more issues?" Yes, and I wrapped up, and they're like, "Can you stay again?" And I said, "I will do 1 more issue, and then I'm done." So I had over 2 years of constant little story wrap up, because the threat was that I was always going to be kicked off.
Wow.
Like Wesley,
I had no idea.
good job. I'll most likely kill you in the morning.
Red Pirate Roberts.
Yeah.
It reminds me of right before I think the last year that Jeff spent in animation before moving back up to Oregon. Jeff had a great run where we were both at Warner Brothers, and it was literally, so when you're laid off in animation in the union, they have to give you a letter. You have to have at least 40 hours of notice to be laid off. So if you're going to be laid off next Friday, then they got to give you the letter that Friday. And Jeff, I think, set a record. I mean, Jeff got something like 13 of those letters in that year, and then they'd fire him they'd give him the 40 hours on a Friday, and then in the course of the next few days, some other production would be like, "Oh wait, Jeff's free? Okay, we'll take him." And so he kept not being fired at the last second, like 12 or 13 different times.
It was so strange. I bounced around. I did so many. I would get laid off from one gig, and then I'd be asked to do the opening for the Mike Tyson cartoon, do some storyboards for that, and I would do that, and then get laid off, and I'd be asked to do some backgrounds for a Superman movie that was being done, and I get laid off for that, and luckily I had experience thanks to comics. I had experience doing all the different jobs,
right?
Storyboards, background, prop, whatever.
He just put his pencil back in that little napkin.
Jeff's very zen. Yeah, exactly. Every time, that's called a bindle stick, by the way.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks to Bill Dunn, our Jeff and ours coworker, that I know what that is. But
yeah. It's it's a funny life, man. It's a weird life being a professional artist and a comic book artist. And it's, I have to say it's a great family of people to do. Generally speaking, everyone I've met, there's great creators, and like they approach this job with so much heart and passion. Like, I know that one of the reasons we feel so much ownership is that we put so much of ourselves into a page, into a story, that it's hard not to feel personally invested.
Well, Jeff, if I can bring it back to some, because Phil kind of asked us this earlier, and I almost thought this was going to be our theme, but it makes me think a lot about, like, how did we get in? And you and I have been friends since high school and stuff, and it makes me think, like, a couple years ago, I worked on Big Mouth for a couple of seasons. And I was just thank you, the amazing people on that show, and I was surrounded by what to me felt like children. You know, like there was just this and you know, Titmouse that runs Big Mouth. I got spoiled at Warner Brothers, like, where you got your own cube, the cubicle door shuts. You know, like you can. It's like you've just got your own space, and this was just pure bullpen. It was like people to your left, people to your right. But what impressed me is how many of them had figured out the thing that I think Jeff and I figured out by accident, which is that the relationships you make in any business are so important. And, you know, networking, I think it's about lateral networking. You know, you need to make a lot of friends with the people that you work with. You got to just be the best person you can be to everyone that you work with. And then what happens is that someone gets that first step up from your, you know, and then that person is able to sometimes kind of like lay down on the wire, you know, Captain America, Tony Stark style, and then help other people up, you know. And then when you get your chance, when you're up, then you help out the other folks and stuff that you know, you know. But I think and I think the whole reason why me and Jeff and Scott are doing this is because, you know, we miss working in the same studio together. You know, we used to spend, you know, 8, 10, 12, 24, 36 hours in a row together, and we miss just shooting the shit and, you know, like, and going, well, who do you think would win in a fight between Linda Carter and Gal Gadot, or Gal Gadot, you know, and you're doing that while you're trying to amuse yourself as you fill in every, you know, like column in the Phil Jimenez inspired Wonder Woman drawing that you're trying to do. You know, it's like,
yeah.
It's funny. I will have to wrap up soon because my iPad's about to die. But
I was just going to say that we're getting close. I think we're getting
close.
late.
But two things that you said I do think are important. One of which is 95% of the people I've met in our business, particularly freelancers, are really good people. Like shockingly kind, good-hearted people who are all in it for roughly the same reasons. We all kind of get what we do. I went to my first, you know, work party at New York Comic-Con in like 2 years, and it was sweet and it was small, but it was a lovely reminder that, oh my God, these are great. They're just some really lovely people, like, in our business. And it was great to be reminded of that. And then again, like, one of the regrets I've had is that I have not made a more concerted effort to strengthen the friendships that I do have in the business. And so even at this late stage, my hope is that in the next couple of years, I can go back out and sort of reaffirm my friendships with a lot of the people I've met over the years.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm waiting for cons to come back as a regular thing, because that's for the people of our generation who weren't always working in-house at Marvel or DC or living in New York City, all of us at that time, kind of a thing. That's turned into a major social connection time for a lot of us. Not even just the big cons, but even the little cons throughout the country and stuff. You just get to see all these old friends or new friends, or, you know, people that you'd read about a long time or whatever, and you finally get to pick their brain about, you know, how they worked, or how their work influenced your work, all that stuff.
Yeah.
No, when I remember once reading I don't remember if it was Walt Simonson. It was someone of that generation of amazing artists, but I remember reading something they were talking about. Maybe it's not Walt, but talking about San Diego, and this is before, say, 2006, when San Diego sort of has now become this different entity with the influence of Hollywood. But I love that they referred to San Diego, and this is how I felt from like 92 to 2005, where you could just show up like a pilgrim, you know, but they called it the gathering of the tribe. And I just sort of feel like Comic-Con really was our Mecca, you know, where it's like, look, you know, or whatever the Statue of Liberty says on the side, you know, where it's like, bring us you just felt like no matter what you were, if you worshiped at the altar of comics, you were welcome at Comic-Con, you know, whether you be fan or creator or whatever. And I miss cons, and I'm happy for I'm happy for our mainstream success of the past 20 years, but I do miss the secret Legion flight ring aspect, you know, long live the Legion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, my
From
friend.
your lips. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. I would love to do this again.
Absolutely. Thank you for all your time, and everyone who's watching, pick up Historia and pick up anything Phil has done. It is well worth the investment. It's well worth the $8 for whatever you're gonna get.
And pick up. These guys are not so bad themselves.
Right.
Anyway, thank you, gentlemen. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Phil.
All right, Phil. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna play
Thanks,
us
Phil.
out. All right, everybody.
Good to see you.
All right. Here we go with this. Hang on, and bang. Check out our various internets. And don't forget to join us for the next episode. We will be making that announcement. And good night, everyone.
Thank you.
You will see Jeff dressing up as Cosmic Boy, Scott dressing up as Saturn Girl, and I will be dressing up as Lightning Lad.
Yeah, that is going to be our new theme. All right. Good night, everybody.